Coming up next, a fabled rock and roll story that's really hard to believe. Today's band had the promise and the grit and the ambition to become one of the greatest bands ever, with a singer and guitarist brother combo that totally lit up the stage. And then tragedy struck when the band's guitarist, virtuoso, died in a serious accident, and the band was stunned. How could they go on without him? Well, their secondary guitarist, or number two guy, stepped up and wrote a song after that would take them to the top of the charts. Now, it had taken him years to write the music, and then it only took him like mere minutes to write the lyrics. It became the band's signature song. Get this, they were held out of the number one spot by the future wife of their singer. 2 years after that, the iconic female who denied them the number one spot would marry their lead singer, and then 1 year after, they lost their bassist. They lost him to the same accident on the same road a year later after the guitarist had died. Truly, a great story of a great song and a band coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you remember trying to create a piece of art out of paper mache as a kid, you're going to dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure that you subscribe below right now. Click the big red button, click the bell so you always know when our latest is coming out. I remember trying to create a Darth Vader out of paper mache when I was a kid. So fun. So let's jump in the DeLorean and set the circuits to the summer of 1971. Let's go back to the early 70s.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
The Vietnam War was raging. The Pentagon Papers had leaked, and the U.S. NASA program landed on the moon for the fourth time with the crew of Apollo 15. On the rock and roll scene, Jim Morrison of The Doors died from a suspected overdose, and the Southern Rock Boys from Jacksonville, Florida, the Allman Brothers, were about to go from rags to riches. The band was close to succumbing to the slow death of heroin use. Virtually all six members of the Allman Brothers struggled with the highly addictive narcotic and spent time in rehab. The commercial turnaround was the group's third release. It was a live album titled At Fillmore East. When the record hit the stores in July of 71, it immediately generated impressive sales from their royalties received off the sales of this live record. The band was actually able to pay off all the money that they owed to their manager and then pay back advances from their record label. The newfound prosperity, it rejuvenated the Allman Brothers. The guys started to eat cleaner, and they hired doctors to administer daily shots of B12, and then gradually, they got back on their feet, healthier and stronger than ever. Duane Allman fueled the band's recovery with his passion and his leadership. His positivity set up the making of the Allman Brothers' next LP, Eat a Peach. To motivate his bandmates, Duane repeated a mantra telling the guys, "We're on a mission. It's time to make this happen." Now this meant the continued ascension of the Allman Brothers. Eat a Peach, it was a 2-disc set. One of the discs was live and the other was a disc of studio material that they started to record, I believe in September of 71. The Eat a Peach sessions, they were going really well. And then tragedy struck. October 29th, during the first real holiday the band was enjoying in more than 2 years. So Duane was visiting the band's communal hangout in Macon, Georgia, dubbed the Big House by the band. He was given his birthday wishes to Linda Oakley, the wife of Allman Brothers bassist Barry Oakley. Now, around 5:45 p.m., Duane hopped on his Harley-Davidson Sportster motorcycle, and he raced down Macon's Hillcrest Avenue. And not long after that, Duane attempted to swerve to avoid a pickup truck moving in the same direction. But because of his speed, he didn't see the vehicle in time to make a safe adjustment. The cycle skidded and it flipped over, pinning Duane under the truck and dragging him and his bike for a good 50 feet. Duane's girlfriend, Dixie Meadows, and Barry Oakley's sister, Candy, they were following the same path as Duane. Although they didn't witness exactly what happened, Dixie drove up to the scene in horror of what they did see. An ambulance was called by a resident that lived nearby, with Dixie and Candy praying that Duane would survive. Severely wounded from the crash, Duane reportedly ceased breathing twice when he was in the ambulance riding to the hospital. He was revived both times from mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. After 3 hours of emergency surgery, Duane Allman was pronounced dead at Macon Medical Center. Now, the attending surgeon, a guy named Dr. Charles Burden, he reported that any of Duane's injuries, including a ruptured coronary artery, a heavily damaged liver, and a collapsed chest, would likely have caused his death. But the combination of the injuries would have made Duane's fate inevitable. The leader, the driving force, the soul of the Allman Brothers perished. It was a devastating setback for this band. Duane was only 24 years old. He was the same age as James Dean was when he died in a car crash. In addition to his invaluable role as a founding member of the Allman Brothers, Duane Allman was one of the most respected musicians of his entire generation. He's often recognized as the artist that was responsible for the musical revolution in the South. Duane and the Allman Brothers were a tremendous influence on the entire region. Actually, a year before his death, Eric Clapton was in the audience of an Allman Brothers concert in Miami, and he was just blown away by Duane. The two virtuosos met after the show, and they ended up in an all-night jam session. That instant rapport between the two of them led to Eric Clapton asking Duane to play with his then band, Derek and the Dominoes. Duane actually shared co-lead guitar duties with Eric, and he played slide guitar on Layla, of course, one of the greatest rock songs ever recorded. And when Duane died, the remaining 5 members of the Allman Brothers, they were just devastated. The band could have just hung it up from there. The fans would have totally understood. But they shook off this deep sadness, and they were determined to carry on, just as Duane would have wanted them to. During a songwriting session for Eat a Peach, Allman Brothers co-founder, the late Dickie Betts, created a country-flavored tune originally called Ramblin Man. The song was inspired by the late, great Hank Williams. Hank Williams, of course, famous country star, died in 1953 from a lethal dose of liquor and pills at only 29 years of age. Arguably one of the most influential artists in recorded music history. 2 years before his untimely death, Hank released Ramblin Man. It's a song that became a manifesto for Southern boys who related to the narrative of a man with a God-given restless spirit that could not be controlled. I love you, baby, but you gotta understand, when the Lord made me, he made a Ramblin' Man.
He made a Ramblin' Man.
Dickie revealed that when he was a kid, his dad was a construction worker that constantly moved his family to cities in Florida where he could find work. In the book, Anatomy of a Song, Dickie recalled that he spent a lot of time in the back of a Greyhound bus, moving from town to town. Ramblin', as Dickie stated, was just in his blood. Fashioned after the restless spirit of Hank Williams, Dickie's tune had a deliberate country flavor to it. He actually never intended it for the Allman Brothers. Instead, he planned to give the song to the man in black himself, Johnny Cash.
In Folsom Prison, and time keeps dragging on.
The other band members, they were reluctant to record Ramblin' Man because of his country sound, so it didn't make the cut for Eat a Peach. But when the Allman Brothers were recording the follow-up record, Brothers and Sisters, the LP that came after Duane's death, the band, they grew to like Ramblin' Man. It just so happened to fill an extra slot very nicely to complete this album. The band pulled a 180 on Ramblin' Man because of Dickie's reworking of a pivotal section in the song's arrangement that changed really the overall complexion of the track. This section was inspired by the breakdown at the end of Layla, that prominently featured Duane's guitar genius. It would essentially be a tribute to their fallen leader. To create what Dickie had in mind, though, he first had to do a lot of overdubbing. But he altered his plan. He decided to bring in a guest artist. Actually, Dickie enlisted his friend Les Dudek to play the lead guitar parts with him in a live recording session, just like he would often do with Duane in the past. Les performed under intense pressure, though, with a steady death glare from Barry Oakley, who was obviously angry about Dudek standing in the exact spot that Duane used to stand in when the band recorded previously. Les and Dickie, they played in unison, laying down an instrumental bed by repeating the guitar line, then repeating the line again in a lower register, which was eventually overdubbed onto the recording. And then Dickie added a slide guitar riff to get a step and repeat blues effect. Dickie's brainchild forged a twin guitar harmony that transitioned Ramblin' Man from his 5-second fiddle emulated intro into a powerful dynamic rocker. I just love it. Accentuating a honky-tonk liberation to Ramblin' Man was Chuck Leavell's lively piano riffs. I mean, Leavell's contribution to Ramblin' Man was critically significant. His piano parts, interchanging with Betts and Dudek's stacked guitar riffs, served as a second instrumental soloist on the track. It's very clever. Dickie worked on his masterful arrangement for Ramblin' Man for over a year, but he actually finished the lyrics in a mere few minutes, sharing that the words came quickly to him because it was really a song about his life and the lives he observed of people around him. Very cool. So after a night of partying at the big house, everyone had gone to bed except for Dickie. At 4 a.m., he was wide awake, and he had this idea for a song. So he just strolled over to the kitchen, and he began to write Ramblin' Man in one steady stream of consciousness. All done. Man, just amazing. Now, while composing the lyrics for Ramblin' Countryman, later shortened to Ramblin' Man, of course, Dickie remembers something that a friend had said to him a few years back that became part of the song's hook line. Dickie was bouncing around with a couple of bands in Florida prior to the formation of the Allman Brothers in the late 60s, and he often ran around with his buddy, a guy named Kenny Harwick. Harwick is one of these guys, that would answer his own questions. He'd say something like, "How's it going? You're just living the dream, aren't you?" So he'd answer it himself. So one day, I guess Harwick asked Dickie how he was doing, and before Dickie could answer, Harwick answered for him. He said, "I bet you're trying to make a living and doing the best you can." Well, that quip, Harwick's quip, it was perfect for the second part of the infectious chorus of Ramblin' Man, and that's where it went. Even with Dickie's stellar overhaul, Ramblin' Man, it was much more rooted in country music than other Allman Brothers tunes, for sure. There was still a little bit of nervousness about the track. When Ramblin' Man was finished, the band's management and their road crew gathered around to hear it. Now, according to Les Dudek, after the song faded out, the room was eerily quiet. Red Dog, who was one of the band's roadies, he was the first to speak, breaking the silence. And he says, "That's the best I've heard since Duane." Now, when it came time for Brothers and Sisters, the album to be released, the label for the Allman Brothers, Capricorn Records, they were torn between Wasted Words or Ramblin' Man to be the lead single from the album. So they decided to take it to a few tastemaker radio stations, and let the listeners make their decision for them. This would be up to the fans. The national promotion director for Capricorn Records sent advance tapes of Ramblin' Man to WQXI AM in Atlanta and the East Coast giant WRKO AM in Boston to play the song and solicit phone-in responses from their listeners. At both stations, Ramblin' Man received a phenomenal reaction, and based on that feedback, Ramblin' Man was selected as the first single from Brothers and Sisters. Interestingly enough, Wasted Words was never released as a single from there. All you really got, yes or no. Meanwhile, Ramblin' Man, it was a runaway smash. It was actually the only pop hit the Allman Brothers ever had. This single, oh man, it just moved. It rocketed up the top 40 chart and went all the way to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1973. It was actually denied the top spot on the chart by Cher's Half-Breed. Cher and the Allman Brothers would share another interesting bit of pop culture history, as many of you probably know, when several years later, Cher and Greg Allman became a romantic couple. They were all over the tabloids. The couple got hitched in 1975, 3 days after Cher divorced Sonny Bono, and their marriage lasted less than 3 years. It's quite volatile, primarily because Greg, he couldn't shake his drug habit, and he turned into a full-blown junkie from there. But it's very interesting that Greg's future wife and her then husband kept his band out of the #1 spot years before. The Allman Brothers didn't have a crossover hit after Ramblin' Man, but Greg had 2 hits as a solo artist. A reimagined version of Midnight Rider for his debut solo album, Laid Back. That one peaked at number 19 on the Billboard Hot 100 in '74. And I'm No Angel, that stalled at number 49 on the Billboard Hot 100, but it was huge as a #1 hit on the Billboard rock charts. Greg's vocal on I'm No Angel reminded many of Bruce Springsteen in that moment.
Bring you back some gold. I'm no angel.
Greg Allman finally got clean and sober in 1995. However, decades of alcohol and drug abuse took its toll on Greg. He actually needed a liver transplant in 2010, and he passed away at 69 in 2017. Like other extraordinary artists that died before they were 30, you gotta wonder what Duane Allman would have done, and what the Allman Brothers would have done for that matter. If only Duane hadn't crashed into that truck when he was only 24. Now, for one, Ramblin' Man might not have been recorded at all, or at least not in the way that it became such a Southern rock anthem. Duane's death inspired a pretty amazing rock arrangement of Ramblin' Man. It broke format barriers for AM top 40 stations in the early 70s, and that's a fact. It's likely, with or without Ramblin' Man, Duane's strong leadership and his visionary artistry would have held the Allman Brothers together for further greatness. You just wonder what other classic songs would have come from this incredible musician. Now, the band rebounded after his death, but they sputtered with inconsistency thereafter. Another key member of the Allman Brothers never really recovered from the tragic death of Duane. I'm speaking of bassist and co-founder Barry Oakley. When Duane died, Barry went into a downward spiral that his bandmates desperately tried to turn around. Barry was visibly suffering from the death of Duane, his friend. He was in a funk of severe depression and would go on binges of drinking and drugs as if he had some kind of a death wish. Greg Allman and Dickie Betts took turns looking after Barry, taking him to places where he couldn't indulge, such as the zoo or just walks in the park. But on November 11, 1972, Barry Oakley suffered a similar fate to Duane, his dear friend and mentor. This is when he crashed his motorcycle into the side of a bus, only 3 blocks away from where Duane had been killed in his motorcycle accident. Actually, Barry declined hospital treatment after the crash and ill-advisedly went home. He gradually grew delirious, so his friends took matters into their own hands and rushed him to the hospital. And it was discovered that Barry had a fractured skull from the impact of slamming into that bus. And he actually died shortly after the diagnosis from cerebral swelling. Now, the doctors trying to save Barry's life concluded, though, that even if he would have gone immediately to the hospital for medical care after the accident, as he should have, he actually wouldn't have survived. Barry Oakley was buried next to Duane's grave at the Rose Cemetery in Macon, Georgia. He, too, was only 24 years old when he died. Sadly, Barry's bass work on Ramblin' Man was his last contribution to the music of the Allman Brothers. In 1998, the Georgia State Legislature passed a resolution naming a bridge on U.S. Route 41 in Macon, Georgia, the Raymond Barry Oakley Third Bridge. It's the same Highway 41 that Dickie joyously sang about in the first verse of Ramblin' Man.
Rolling down Highway 41.
At the same time that the bridge was christened for Barry Oakley, the road that carried the bridge was designated as Duane Allman Boulevard, in honor and remembrance of the late founding members of the Allman Brothers. Ramblin' Man creator Dickie Betts passed away on April 18, 2024 of cancer at the age of 80. Betts was a co-founder of the band, like I said, along with brothers Greg and Duane. And at the beginning, he was the second-string guitarist in the shadow of Duane, the band's leader. But Dickie Betts ended up writing the band's 4 biggest songs: Ramblin' Man, Jesse, Crazy Love, and Straight from the Heart. But only one of those was a huge hit. It's hard to believe, one of the greatest Southern rock bands ever, and they only had one big hit. I gotta tell you, I was raised on the Southern rock of Leonard Skinner, 38 Special, Black Oak, Arkansas, Molly Hatchet, the Allman Brothers, and the like. But Ramblin' Man, it's a song that holds a very special place in my heart. You know, it's auditory ambiance, so magical, so potent. I mean, sometimes it would turn the small town I grew up in of Blackfoot, Idaho, into the South, if only for a few minutes. Rest in power, Duane and Greg Allman and Barry Oakley and Dickie Betts. Your music continues to lift us. And thanks so much for watching. Leave us a comment about the Allman Brothers and Ramblin' Man. What are your memories of the song of this band? What are the Southern rock songs or bands should we cover here? What do you think about Duane Allman as a musician? Let's have a great discussion below. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe. We would love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, records.